Hannibal Barca. The man, the myth, the legend, the...
Down!
Seriously, this guy could have single-handedly changed history. This guy rode across the Alps on war elephants in the winter and defeated the mighty Rome.
Dog!
Hannibal had Rome with its pants around their ankles and could have taken them any which way he wanted to, no Vaseline. But then Hannibal was like,
I don't want it.
why? Well, the why we will explore in this video, but if you thought that Hannibal was just another formidable enemy that Rome put in his place, then
let me tell you something. Let me tell you something. All right. Let me tell you something. Let me tell you something.
let me tell you the true story of Hannibal Barca, a story that started in 247 BCE. Started like most stories, with a woman realizing,
I'm pregnant, you little bitch.
in fact, she was pregnant by Hannibal Barca, who was the military equivalent of a popular high school quarterback, the most popular guy in Carthage, good-looking, ambitious, and violent. Oh, in Carthage, by the way, that's where our story takes place, kind of situated in modern-day Tunisia. Carthage at the time was the bee's knees up in North Africa, meaning they put everybody else over their knees, meaning they murdered everybody who disagreed with them, taking over their lands and cities. With that sunny disposition, Carthage became a superpower that controlled the Mediterranean sea routes as well as regions as far away as Sicily and Sardinia, aka regions as far away as Italy, so at this point, unsurprisingly, enter Rome, which at the time was still the Roman Republic, because this is 200 years before Julius Caesar did his dictator thing. Still, at the time, Rome already had great ambitions and was ever unsatisfied with its size, but despite not having the biggest, or maybe because of it, Rome was aware of the importance of the motion in the ocean, and so Carthage controlling that ocean was a major problem. And kids, what do you do when you have a problem? That's right, you use violence. Life advice. To be exact, you start a war, the First Punic War to be very exact, which saw Rome fighting Carthage from 264 BCE until 241 BCE. That war was fought mostly on water, while the few land battles focused around the very important strategic point that was Sicily, and to simplify, ultimately, Rome won the First Punic War and forced Carthage into a treaty that, to simplify once more, that kind of went like this.
Senator, you can have my answer now if you like. My offer is this. Nothing.
Carthage had to hand over control of the Mediterranean Sea to Rome and was not allowed to attack any Roman territory nor its allies. Now everybody knows what you do when you come to an agreement or make a promise with somebody you don't like, right, kids? You break your promise. You break that promise and use more violence. Enter Hannibal Barca. As I said, Hannibal was born in 247 to Hamilcar, which would make Hannibal 6 years old at the end of the First Punic War, old enough to be aware that his Giga Chad dad was humiliated in the Punic war battles he participated in the later years of that war. And since humiliation is best dealt with by resentment, and everything you resent is best dealt with by passing it on to your child to achieve the things you never could, Papa Hannibal Barca passed on a very specific destiny to his son Hannibal: destroy Rome or die trying.
Go.
And to make sure Hannibal gets the message, his father made him participate in a ritual where they dipped their hands in basins filled with the blood of sacrificed animals and swore an oath that they will one day take down Rome. I mean, I insisted on being pushed in a trolley by my dad until I was 5, but hey, we all grow up differently, I guess. All in all, Papa Barca set his son Hannibal up for quite the revenge arc. And don't forget that Papa Barca was still that dude. He was basically the reason Carthage had control over the Iberian Peninsula, where he had fought and won countless battles. So he was a man of influence and wealth, meaning he could give his son the best education ever. And basically, young Hannibal entered a superhero training arc the moment he could read. The best philosophers taught him, well, philosophy. The art of warfare was taught to him by the best of the best, and the role model Hannibal took to and studied the most was the same person that would later inspire Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great. But because studying is super boring, Hannibal actually didn't take his studies too seriously and would slack off every once in a while by playing video games that he got from instant gaming. It was convenient because instant gaming constantly had discounts on all his favorite games, and obviously my boy had it all. PS4, 5, all the boxes with X's and S's, a PC, you name it, he had it. And instant gaming had games for it. The new Black Myth Wukong, why pay full price when you can get a code on instant gaming and get it way cheaper? And that goes for basically every single game. All legal, all original, no resale, no used, and no crack. Unless you choose to in your own time, but that's you, I'm just saying.
Don't do drugs. If you're doing it, stop it.
There are no restrictions on the multiplayer, none of that. It's literally the same as downloading from the PlayStation Store or Steam or any store. It's the same, it's just cheaper. Now, I don't know about you, but
I'm broke, baby. I ain't got no money.
So I'm rolling with instant gaming all day.
All done! All done! All done!
I don't need it. I don't want it.
What's up?
There's really no reason for you not to click that link in the description. Use instant gaming and save money on every game from here on out, like Hannibal did. But then Hannibal's father realized that his son was gaming all the time, so he forbid it, and back to studying the tactics of Alexander the Great it was. And you have to know that Alexander the Great was a man who A, was known for being great, and B, also for using aggressive, high-risk, high-reward, unconventional battle tactics that were impossible to predict and impossible to plan for, something that would later define Hannibal. So Hannibal grew up in a Carthage that was entirely bitter and hated Rome over its imposed restrictions and taxes, and when Hannibal's father died in 228 BCE, Hannibal followed in his footsteps, becoming a respected army general at just 26 years young. And this was not just nepotism at play, no. Even army veterans were like,
I like this one.
they saw the greatness and fire of his father burning within young Hannibal, and just like daddy, Hannibal led campaigns around the Iberian Peninsula where he kept winning battle after battle and earned himself quite the reputation. A new star was born in Carthage, and he shone so bright that eventually Hannibal had to drag his massive balls around Carthage, and his reputation made its way to Rome, where the Romans had a feeling that this wasn't going to end well, and they certainly didn't like that Carthage controlled the entire Iberian Peninsula. So Rome established a diplomatic alliance with the Iberian city of Sagunto, aka they said,
I'm the new dog in the yard, and I just pissed all over this cage.
This left Big Balls Hannibal with no choice but to respond by attacking and conquering the city of Sagunto to send a message that was the perfect excuse for Rome to say that Carthage now broke the treaty and that they had to return control of Sagunto to Rome, as well as pay Rome tons of money or pay the consequences. And so reasonably, Hannibal said, sorry, I can't hear you over the sound of my big balls dragging through the city I just took from you. So consequences it was, aka it was time for the Second Punic War, Hannibal versus Rome. This was Hannibal's destiny all along. This was what he had been prepping for all his life. So the guy knew exactly what to do to defeat Rome. Lose half his troops on the way to the war. Yeah, but there was a reason for that. You see, ever since the First Punic War, Rome had mastered this whole motion in the ocean thing and dominated the seas. So Hannibal couldn't attack by way of water, and via land, he knew that Rome would be ready to meet him with numbers and perfectly dug trenches, and just generally having the advantage of prepping for a Carthage army that has to march towards them. So with no direct route of attack, Hannibal chose to do what no sane man would ever attempt to cross the Alps in the winter and appear in Rome's front yard unexpectedly. To be precise, Hannibal crossed the Alps with 70,000 men, 20,000 horses, and 37 war elephants, which is it's absolute insanity for a reason. And that reason was that Hannibal ended up with only half of his troops making it across the Alps. The rest starved, froze to death, or died in skirmishes against tribes that made the mountains their home and attacked the Carthage caravan to steal themselves some equipment. There was nothing but hardships for Hannibal in his winter crossing of the Alps, but at the end of it, he did make it into Roman territory, and he did catch Rome with its pants down, and since he didn't pack any Vaseline for the trip, it was about to get painful. Rome certifiably panicked. No one was expecting Hannibal to cross the Alps, obviously, and in fact the Roman troops ready to meet Hannibal were stationed well away from Rome, blocking off the water and land routes they expected Hannibal to take. The Carthage general had completely outmaneuvered them, and simply put, Rome...
No! No! She wasn't ready!
So immediately after crossing the Alps, Hannibal used this advantage and quickly bolstered up his remaining 40-something thousand men by convincing the Gauls to join his battle. These Gaulish tribes had been living in territory Rome stole from them and had been oppressed, taxed, and humiliated ever since. Hannibal appeared a savior to many of them, who were very, very eager to join him and finally get payback against Rome. That meant that Hannibal quickly got his numbers back up, while Rome was busy sending word to their faraway anti-Hannibal force to come back as quickly as possible, since the enemy is already in their front yard. Of course, Hannibal wasn't about to wait for Rome to gather its forces, so with the Roman army divided, Hannibal attacked the few legions they confronted him with. Legions who were not battle ready, and Hannibal absolutely laid the smackdown on them. And with each win, Hannibal was then able to convince more Gauls to join the winning side, his side, until his army was big enough to take on Rome's main force. The returning troops, the anti-Hannibal force, back and ready to fulfill their purpose, finally clashed with Hannibal's forces in the legendary Battle of the Trebia on December 22nd in 218 BCE. Rome at the time was absolutely confident in its heavily armored and structured infantry with its endless formations, but they ended up being no match for Hannibal's North African cavalry, who kept attacking Roman encampments with a swiftness reminiscent of how Genghis Khan would later operate. By the time you knew what hit you, they were already gone, and the Romans had no choice but to chase after the cavalry to get them to meet their infantry in battle, but
It's a trap!
Hannibal wanted the Romans to chase his cavalry all along, chase them into an ambush he'd set up by a muddy river that would immobilize Rome's famous heavy infantry and make them easy pickings for Hannibal's troops. And the plan had worked to absolute perfection. Hannibal dominated yet again, winning his biggest battle yet, which meant that Hannibal now stood at 3 wins.
No losses!
Rome was shook. This was all they had, and Hannibal just curb-stomped them. Fear spread across the city. Hannibal seemed unstoppable. I mean, even when diseases hit Hannibal's army, courtesy of all this fighting in the swamp, and Hannibal came down with a nasty eye infection, the dude just burned out the damaged tissue and rocked an eye patch to make his gangster even more obvious. The man was on a mission, and all the way into spring 217 BCE, Hannibal's campaign devastated Rome as he slowly but surely advanced through their territory. And all Rome could use to its advantage was that it was their territory. So from all the people they subjugated, Rome could quickly draft all somewhat capable men, force them to fight in Roman improv armies that were basically suicide squads, with the purpose of constantly meeting Hannibal in battle bound to die, but hopefully slowly enough to slow Hannibal down enough so that Rome can prepare an actual large force of capable soldiers that could then meet Hannibal in another decisive battle, a battle that eventually took place on August 2nd, 216 BCE, and this one truly was for all the marbles. The fate of the known world at the time was on the line. This battle was like
Assemble.
The Battle of Cannae was so vicious that it simply became known as the Battle of Annihilation. 86,000 Roman warriors versus 56,000 troops fighting in the name of Carthage and Hannibal. And you'd think that being outnumbered by 30,000 men would spell doom for Mr. Eyepatch, but no. Hannibal recalled the risky tactics he'd studied from Alexander the Great, and this was exactly the time to employ them. While Rome set up its standard formation that had made the Republic the force it was, Hannibal used his cavalry to flank the Romans, and as the Roman infantry, the heavy infantry, the pride and heart of their army, advanced against the Carthage infantry with all the advantages of their superior Roman formation and their Roman equipment, they didn't realize that Hannibal's cavalry had wiped out their flanks so quickly that they were entirely surrounded. The Roman army, the Roman legions, were attacked from all sides, and the Carthage cavalry closed off any chance of retreat, meaning the battle turned into an absolutely one-sided slaughter. 50,000 Romans died and 20,000 were captured versus only 6,000 dead on Hannibal's side. The defeat was so epic and so definite that the battle is still studied by armies to this day. Hannibal didn't just seem unstoppable anymore, he was. And now he was at Rome's gates, and the phrase Hannibal is at the gates caused panic all throughout Rome, uttered so many times that it still stands as a metaphor for a feared enemy coming for you now. Rome had nothing left that could stop Hannibal's advance, and the Roman Senate ordered the city gates to be closed, all but ready for Hannibal to come huffing and puffing. But this is exactly when Hannibal made his greatest mistake. After having lured Rome into so many ambushes with his superior yet ever-thinking mind, Hannibal started overthinking the situation. He was sure Rome had some ace up their sleeve. He was sure Rome must have learned from his tactics, and that by advancing on the city gates too carelessly, he would lead his troops into an ambush. And so he advanced with all the caution in the world, leading even his closest advisors to criticize him, famously saying, "Assuredly, no one man has been blessed with all of God's gifts. You, Hannibal, know how to gain a victory, you do not know how to use it." And so Hannibal left Rome enough time to once again summon up their improv Suicide Squad armies, not to meet Hannibal's main forces, but just to constantly attack his camps and engage him in enough skirmishes to slow him down and drag his advance out. And it worked. Rome's Suicide Squad slowed Hannibal down so much that word from Carthage, word from back home, reached the great general. Carthage could no longer afford Hannibal's war campaign. After all, over 15 years of warfare had gone by, and the constant need for supplies and reinforcements, it was bleeding Carthage dry, and also leaving it undefended. And while Hannibal was taking his sweet old time to advance on Rome, and Rome was keeping him busy with their suicide squads, Rome was actually rushing to mount a counterattack not against Hannibal, but against Carthage. They knew that with such a large force in their lands, Carthage must largely be undefended, so they put one man in charge of their legions to strike the enemy's home, a man who had faced Hannibal in the Battle of Annihilation and survived, Scipio Africanus. Yeah, that name is kind of a spoiler of how he did in the upcoming battle. Africanus used everything he'd learned from his defeat at the hands of Hannibal except his indecisiveness. Once Africanus got to Carthage, he razed all the surrounding cities with a quickness and closed in on Carthage's main gates, and the government had no choice but to finally and urgently call Hannibal back in 203 BCE to defend the city. And so Hannibal's troops retreated from Rome to face Scipio Africanus in their homeland, meaning Rome was saved. But Hannibal's fighting days were far from over, and in 202 BCE, the master met the student in battle. Hannibal faced off against Scipio Africanus, and while the Carthage general attacked with the fresh supply of war elephants his homeland had in spades, Africanus used the same wild, unexpected tactics Hannibal was once famous for. He had his soldiers blow thousands of trumpets to create a noise so deafening that it terrified the charging elephants and sent some of them running back into their own troops in a panic, breaking Hannibal's own lines and trampling his soldiers. Then Africanus used the superior North African cavalry he had recruited as mercenaries while raiding/freeing the cities that were under Carthage's dominance. He used that cavalry to flash attack Hannibal's army and surround his troops, just as Hannibal had once done to the Romans. And once Hannibal's men were surrounded with no escape, they had no choice but to face the superior Roman infantry marching on them, and they had no chance. The battle ended in an utter defeat for Carthage and Hannibal, a defeat so crushing, in fact, that the general retreated to Carthage to let the government know that they had nothing left to defend themselves with, that once again they had lost a Punic war and were forced to surrender and agree to whatever demands Rome set out for them. And this time, the demands were that Carthage was no longer allowed to wage war against anyone without Rome's permission. They were not allowed to train new war elephants, and they were forbidden to build a new naval fleet. AKA, they might have as well given Rome its balls while they were at it. So at 46 years old, the great Hannibal, who literally had Rome on its knees, had finally lost and resigned to a career of politics within Carthage. But still, the man had sworn oath. Remember, animal blood with his dad and all that. So the idea of one day defeating Rome still kept him going, and eventually he struck up contact with Antiochus III, a great king whose empire dominated Syria and parts of Western Asia at the time. And together with a Carthage led by Hannibal, the two might have just been able to give Rome some more trouble, but the Romans were way too careful this time around and had eyes and ears everywhere. They quickly found out about Hannibal's scheming and forced Carthage to hand their man over. So Hannibal fled his homeland into self-imposed exile instead, where he bounced from city to city, ever evading the Romans who went from city to city to find their nemesis and finally kill him. This went on until 181 BCE, when Rome finally caught up to a 66-year-old Hannibal in the city of Libissa, modern-day Turkey, where Hannibal decided that he was tired of running, and the former general preferred to go out on his own terms, leaving the Romans and the world with a suicide note that read, "Let us relieve the Romans from the anxiety they have so long experienced, since it tries their patience too much to wait for an old man's death." And so Hannibal Barca took his own life. Rome's greatest enemy was dead. And it cannot be denied that Rome had learned so much from Hannibal's war tactics that it changed their way of warfare forever and ultimately set them up to be the warring machine that would turn the Roman Republic into one of the world's greatest empires. And in recognition of their greatest foe, statues of Hannibal were erected in Rome to honor the enemy they hated as much as they respected. Such was the greatness of Hannibal Barca.